Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We got good, bad, and crazy martinis for you. And just as I was a few weeks ago, if Jim sometimes seems like he's not completely locked in today, he's heading out on vacation shortly after we record today. But Jim, I know you're a professional and you're going to give it your all here as you head out for the next week.
A lot of listeners are going to say, I can't tell any difference.
All right. Well, our good martini is a follow-up on yesterday's good martini. And this one's not quite as good in the pure sense, but it's good in the sense that it's fun to watch Democrats eat each other. And if you have any popcorn handy, hey, go for it. Yesterday we talked about how a dozen House Democrats, and really it should have been a couple hundred House Democrats, criticized Ilhan Omar for seemingly comparing the Taliban and Hamas with the United States and Israel, talking about human rights atrocities and so forth. And so Ilhan Omar took offense at that, but then ultimately I think she got talked to by Nancy Pelosi. And so then later on Thursday, Omar said that she was not equating them and she just wanted to make sure that human rights abuses were dealt with all over the place. The House Democratic leadership put out a statement condemning what Omar had said. But just when you think it's over, Jim, here comes Rashida Tlaib, fellow squad member. And she's not the only fellow squad member weighing in. Tlaib tweets out yesterday afternoon, just before 4 o'clock. I think this is after all the statements from Omar and the House Democrats leaders came out. Freedom of speech doesn't exist for Muslim women in Congress. The benefit of the doubt doesn't exist for Muslim women in Congress. House Democratic leadership should be ashamed of its relentless, exclusive tone policing of Congresswomen of color. Not to be outdone, Jamal Bowman of New York. He was the one we talked about earlier this week in response to Joe Manchin. But he says when a woman, person of color, or Muslim speaks out against injustice, backlash ensues. When Ilhan Omar speaks out, the vitriol is compounded by her being all three. As Democrats, we must recognize the biases that fuel personal attacks and defend our colleagues. Ayanna Pressley, stop the bad faith attempts to take Ilhan Omar's words out of context. She called a simple question. The ICC exists to investigate and exact recourse when human rights are violated. Jim, so Nancy Pelosi trying to put this fire out as quickly as possible. Not everybody's playing ball, though, so we're going to see how much this intra-party fighting plays out on the public stage.
Greg, let's take a moment and just kind of step back and look at all of the motives of everyone involved. Like, do you think Nancy Pelosi wants to spend a lot of time issuing statements, calling attention to something controversial one of her Democratic House members said? Right? The answer is no. The last thing she wants to do, she's only going to do this when not doing it is going to cause her bigger headaches than doing it, right? Do you think those 12, I believe they're all Jewish Democrats who called her, Ilhan Omar, do you think they want to do that? Do you think they really, they're itching and looking for a fight with fellow Democrats over Middle East policy? I don't think so. I think they'd rather avoid that fight if they could. It's only when it gets so egregious there. And if you look at what, Ilhan Omar and the squad, like, if you wanted to say U.S. policy is too favorable towards Israel and not favorable enough towards the Palestinians, I don't agree with that. But it's not a crazy thing to say. It's not an inherently offensive thing to say. I think it's just wrong. Now, the thing is though, if you want to say there are a lot of innocent Palestinian people who get hurt when Hamas fires rockets and Israel fires back, who's going to speak for these people? Who's going to stand up for these people? Hamas is a terrible group to have in charge of your territory. Like, there are a lot of ways that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and the squad could, try to get people to say, hey, we in the United States have an obligation to help innocent Palestinians. You're going to get some pushback on that, but at least that would be within the realms. But Ilhan Omar can't do that. She's got to go out and make this argument, which very clearly had stated that Israel and the U.S. and Hamas and the Taliban were all morally equivalent, that they've all committed atrocities. They're all the same. And, we only investigate some and not the other. Right. And it was kind of this argument of, well, the difference is that, Hamas and Taliban, they get held accountable for their abuses, but Israel and the U.S. don't. Right. So in a way, she's they're worse than Hamas and the Taliban. So, that's like the worst possible way you can make that argument. And instead of recognizing, Ilhan should have put it differently, all right, I understand the point she was trying to get at, but this is really more counterproductive. It's just starting to die down. And then Rashida Tlaib has to jump out and say, one, like, freedom of speech doesn't exist for Muslim women in Congress. Like, if you're making that argument, I never want to hear you arguing that it's okay for Twitter to take Trump off its platform, right? I mean, the whole thing is that, because no one has said Muslim women in Congress can't speak. No one is saying Ilhan Omar can't speak. They're saying, no, it's a stupid thing to say and you shouldn't say it. Right? It's not saying, that we're gonna prevent her from speaking on the House floor. We're going to deny her the ability to be on Twitter. We're going to deny her the ability to put out press releases. We're not going to allow her to do press conferences on Capitol Hill. None of that is restricting her freedom of speech. It's just saying, no, that's a dumb thing to say, and you shouldn't have said it. And then Rashida Tlaib, House Democratic leadership should be ashamed of its relentless, exclusive tone policing of Congresswomen of color. She's calling Nancy Pelosi and the other House Democrats in leadership racist, judging Congresswomen of color by a different standard. But look, Greg, do you think that applies to Jim Clyburn?
Good question. She's just chucking stuff against the wall and seeing where it sticks here. But I think that Nancy Pelosi's goal was to put this off to the side as quickly as possible, and now this is going to keep it on the front page for at least another day or so.
Just like it is this marvel, like there's this attitude. You can blame Trump for it, but it predates him. It's kind of been. I mentioned yesterday that like Ilhan Omar and Marjorie Taylor Greene are not as far apart as Democrats would like to pretend, right? Every party's got its fringe. We all remember, Dennis Kucinich wanted to have a Department of Peace instead of a Department of Defense, and Jim Traficant had that dead squirrel on his head and he used to say, "Beam me up, Mr. Speaker." Like, there's always been these wackos in Congress. Fine, you get 435 million Americans together. So at least a handful of them are going to be lunatics and weirdos. Fine. But what's interesting is that each step of the way, the squad chooses the most confrontational way. Like every time there's a fire, they want to pour gasoline on it. And yet somehow they wonder how they're marginalized. Gee, how did that happen, Greg?
Yeah, it's really hard to figure out. But, the media used to love talking about how the House leadership, when Republicans had the majority, the House leadership and the Freedom Caucus, man, look at this infighting. This is ugly. Pop the popcorn. But when this happens on the Democratic side, they don't seem to enjoy it as much. But we do. And so we'll see how much this continues, because the longer Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are making news and kind of are seen by folks as mouthpieces for the Democratic Party, well, that can't hurt us at all. Let's talk about some even better news, though. Father's Day coming up here. I believe it's a week from Sunday. Hope you've got your plans in order to get some wonderful things for your dad. But one of the best things you can get him is Omaha Steaks. I love Omaha Steaks, and as I mentioned just a couple of weeks ago, Omaha Steaks, as soon as they come to mind, they make me think of becoming a father because, as I mentioned, when our first daughter, we thought the day she was going to be born, we headed to the hospital. Didn't happen. She was born a couple days later, but when we came back on that first attempt, we had a big box of Omaha Steaks sitting on the porch. It was a great gesture, a great gift from a friend, and of course, after our daughter was born, we had some meals coming in from friends and through the church and so forth. But we also had the Omaha Steaks, and that was a great thing to have while my wife was recovering, and we were getting used to a very different sort of life. So Omaha Steaks and fatherhood go together for me, and right now Omaha Steaks has an amazing limited-time Father's Day offer just released for our listeners. Go to omahasteaks.com and enter the promo code MARTINI into the search bar and order the Dad's Best Grill Pack.
This is astounding. It is basically a week's worth of fantastic meals for less than $100. For $99.99, you will get 28 of Omaha Steaks' favorite entrees. We're talking 4 bacon-wrapped fillets, 4 premium boneless chicken breasts, 4 boneless pork chops, 8 gourmet jumbo franks, plus the all-time favorite, the made-from-scratch caramel apple tartlets, the Omaha Steaks signature seasoning packet, and 8 free filet mignon burgers, all for just $99.99.
So great. All these things are very, very good. I especially love the steaks and the burgers, and I mentioned the restaurant-style fries last time, but everything in this packet you are going to love. This is an unbelievable offer at 59% savings. These packages are selling out fast, though, so don't wait. Go to omahasteaks.com, use the keyword Martini, and order the Dad's Best Grill Pack today. That's omahasteaks.com. keyword martini for a 59% savings and 8, count them 8, free filet mignon burgers. Man, it's hard to beat that. All right, let's talk about our, I don't know if this is another crazy martini or potentially bad. I guess it's bad that Harris doesn't just go to the border and end the talking point here. Jim, you'd think she'd do it just for that reason alone. The main reason she should go to the border is to actually find out what's happening there and maybe get a little more urgency in solving that part of the problem instead of just dealing with root causes. We talked about her dust-up with Lester Holt, of all people, who simply asked when she's going to the border, and she first of all said she did, and then she said, well, I haven't been to Europe either, so I don't know what your point is. But then she did an interview, I believe, after returning from Guatemala with Ilia Calderon of Univision, which is not exactly the most hostile outfit in the media towards the Biden administration either. But the same question came up, and Harris is still not ready for it.
¿Cómo le responde usted a él?
I've said I'm going to go to the border. And
When are you going to the border, Vice President?
the administration has asked... I'm not finished. I've said I'm going to the border. And also, if we are going to deal with the problems at the border, we have to deal with the problems that cause people to go to the border, to flee to the border.
Jim, she's still not ready for it, so she should just go, although she would probably be seen by some as just going for political reasons. But if she went to Guatemala to study root causes, you might want to go to the border, and you wouldn't have to deal with this question all the time.
I mean, like the one of the ways you can joke about this is, you know, which border are you talking about, Madam Vice President? Because you haven't been to the U.S.-Mexican border. You got kind of close to the Canadian border up in New Hampshire a little while back, but that's not really the one people are worrying about. I'd remind listeners that back on the Lester Holt interview, Harris said, we've been to the border. And my joking response, like, who's this we stuff? And then Holt says, you haven't been to the border. And that's when she had her interest. And I haven't been to Europe. I don't know what I don't understand the point you're making. Like, all of this, somewhere along the line, someone in the vice president's circle, or maybe the administration, maybe Biden, I don't know. Somebody looked at this and said, wow, if she goes to the border, she goes to a detention facility, she sees where the kids are being held, she sees where everybody else is. It's going to call attention to the issue. This is our weakest issue. It looks really bad. Let's just not do that, and hopefully no one will notice. Well, surprise, people have noticed. It's not like Republicans were just going to forget about this issue and not raise this point. And if you are in charge of stemming the tide of migration, is how Biden had put it. Right? This is not like, because there's this whole thing about no, she's talking about the root causes. Well, look, he didn't say it that specifically when he was announcing she'd be taking this position. And even if you want to focus on the root causes, there's really like what's the harm of a trip to the border? If you want to say this administration is opposed to, it would just be a meaningless photo op. Joe Biden went to a rock climbing facility in Alexandria, Virginia, not too far from where I'm sitting. This administration does, meaningless, happy photo ops all the time. So I don't understand why they wouldn't want to do this one, even if you think of it just as a photo op. But also, there's just kind of this sense that, like, if she actually did see it, maybe the idea of, hey, you're just going to cross her mind, we can't downplay this. But now it just seems like this stubborn, you can't make me go to the border. And the other thing I think, which is just very revealing about Harris, and we saw this in the debates, and I think it's there, I don't know about you, Greg. I go to Barnes & Noble, go to the magazine section. It's a little bit less now, but for much of the past year, you've seen these like special editions of Newsweek and other publications, and they don't have Biden on the cover. Or at least, most of them do. They have Kamala Harris on the cover. And it's like this, her historic journey, or a milestone for American women. It's just this very open celebration of her, very Obama-esque for those of us with memories going back to 2007, 2008, 2009. But she's not. She's actually, arguably not that good at this. And I think this reflects in part, in California, you're just never used to pushback. In California, being part of the Democratic machine, you just never get this kind of pushback. And clearly Kamala Harris has decided I'm not finished, don't interrupt me, don't stop, I'm still talking, these lines, remember that, her interaction with Pence in the vice presidential debate, it's now become kind of reflexive to her. So now she likes to play that card whenever anyone interrupts her filibustering in any capacity. And so it comes to this, the idea that Univision is somehow being sexist to her, or Univision is somehow being racist to her. Like, it's a perfectly valid question. And it's kind of fascinating that each successive interview she does digs this hole deeper, no matter how friendly the interviewer is. It really is kind of fascinating. Oh, there's another thing. I think it was the ex-Politico folks who did Punch Bowl. I want to say it was Jake Sherman, but I could be wrong. One of them said Harris has been getting interview training while she's vice president. And Greg, I just found that report baffling, because by the time you're vice president, aren't you supposed to be good at doing television interviews?
I mean, she ran for president for almost a year. I mean, she didn't get to the point
badly.
Where, she didn't do well, but you'd think you'd at least get practice in that. I mean, and these aren't hard questions. They're not challenging questions. Imagine if one of these people actually got into the details of Biden administration policy and how that could be, and not could be, is contributing to the massive problem at the border. Imagine if it actually got into that sort of discussion. She'd be completely lost. And I think this is evidence that while you might be a good demagogue on the campaign trail, actually getting down and rolling up your sleeves and digging into policy is a very different skill set, and she's just not good at it.
Like the right answer, the way to get out of this mess is to say, next Thursday, I'm going to the border next Thursday. And that, and then the question, would it be a rough news cycle? Sure. But you know what? You get done with the real, like you rip off the Band-Aid and the damage ends quickly, as opposed to just stretching it out over and over and over, to the point where now it's this cloud over her that's going to happen until she goes to the border, because people think it's perfectly reasonable to say, well, if you're dealing with immigration issues, you're trying to understand why migration's going on, you probably should go to the border.
I wonder how she feels about Biden saying this week that he plans to run again in 2024. I don't think that was her plan for 2024, but we'll see what happens between now and then. But let's talk about something happier than Kamala Harris being a Biden heartbeat away from the presidency. Let's talk about getting serious in the kitchen. If you're serious about cooking, and you really want to make the best possible food, you need to invest in your kitchen tools. And Made In's cookware and kitchenware products are used by thousands of the world's best chefs. Jim and I were both given the option to order some cookware from Made In. My wife and I ordered the stainless steel skillet. Used it just a couple of days ago. My skill set in the kitchen is not profound. I scrambled some eggs in there, but I'll tell you, it worked better than the other pan because of the even heat that happens with stainless steel. It's not quite the same with the others. The food tasted great, and they're very easy to clean. Sometimes when you have some of these other pans, you got to worry about that you're actually damaging them, but looking great here with the Made In skillet. So if you're looking for ways to upgrade your kitchen and you want a very quality piece of cookware on that stove, Made In is the way to go.
Made In produces professional quality cookware and knives for those who love to cook. They source the finest materials and partner with renowned craftsmen to make premium kitchen tools available directly to you without the markup. Made In products are made to last, and they offer a lifetime guarantee. Their cookware distributes heat evenly and can easily go from the stovetop to the oven. And their knives are fully forged, perfectly balanced, and they stay sharp. Now, they have 28,000 five-star reviews, and their products are used by some of the world's best chefs at Michelin-starred restaurants around the world. Made In is better cookware for better meals.
And right now, Made In is offering you, our 3 Martini Lunch listener, 15% off your first order with promo code MARTINI. Look, it's the best discount available anywhere online for Made In products, so don't miss it. Go to madeincookware.com/martini and use the promo code MARTINI for 15% off your first order. Again, that's madeincookware.com/martini and use the promo code MARTINI. All right, moms and dads, we're going to be talking about Jeffrey Toobin here for the next few minutes on the 3 Martini Lunch. So if you've got any kids near, you might want to hit the pause button here in the next few seconds. And here we go. Jeffrey Toobin, longtime fixture on network and cable TV as a legal analyst, for the most part left-wing. He's also spent a lot of time covering the OJ trial. So sometimes he digs into legal cases that don't directly have a political overtone. But in addition to working for CNN for many years, Jeffrey Toobin was also affiliated with The New Yorker until last fall. In October, he was on a Zoom call. The Zoom call took a break. He thought it was disconnected. And to put it quite succinctly, other of his New Yorker colleagues found him on their screens gratifying himself. He was fired by The New Yorker. He was suspended by CNN. But yesterday, For some inexplicable reason, they decided to put him back on the air. There was this awkward conversation with Allison Camerata where she asked him all about that incident, and he managed to not only say how, dumb he was to do it, and moronic, I think was a word he used. He even managed to work in a book plug for something he's working on about the Oklahoma City bombing. But Jim, the question in here is, why can't CNN find anyone else to offer left-wing legal opinions? Why does Jeffrey Toobin have to get back? A lot of people, including women in the media, saying there seems to be a good old boy standard here that allows Jeffrey Toobin to come back when a lot of other people wouldn't.
Yeah, this really just nagged at me yesterday. It sounded like a Onion headline. When we heard the news about what he had done, it seemed like an egregious enough offense that that'd be the end of, we wouldn't hear from Jeffrey Toobin. We certainly wouldn't be seeing him on our televisions, and we didn't need to hear from him. He's 61 years old. He's published a lot of books. He was on CNN since like 2002. I think he wrote his book. The OJ thing was set up for the FX series. He's made his fortune. Go off and I'm going to say ride into the sunset, or just go away, Jeffrey Toobin. And that's not going to be the case. And I wrote about this extensively. It really kind of nags at me because I keep hearing people defending, well, he didn't know he was on camera. Yeah, well, that's kind of the important part. that matters a great deal. It'd be even worse if he knew he was on. But this is, you're just not supposed to do that. And this, but yes, post-pandemic Zoom puts us in this weird situation where we're in our homes, but we're in a work environment and all that kind of stuff. But you're just not supposed to do that. And the other thing is that we live in a world in which there is this new sweeping cultural standard. I'm not talking about the Me Too stuff. I'm talking about Gina Carano can no longer be in Star Wars because she made what I thought was a genuinely ham-fisted Holocaust comparison. I mean, I wasn't a fan of what it says, but I was fine with her performance. That struck me as the sort of thing where if you're Disney, you pull her aside and say, we really wish you hadn't posted that. You're putting us in an awkward spot. Please stop shooting off your mouth and making Holocaust comparisons like that. And then you go on with your lives. But no, we couldn't have Gina Carano on anymore. J.K. Rowling is insufficiently supportive of insisting that a trans woman is the same as a biological woman, and thus she's now one amongst history's greatest monster. Don McNeil, formerly the star science reporter at the New York Times, had been there for like 20-some years, used the N-word while quoting someone else in a conversation with students, and he had to go, right? So there's this constant, no, one strike and you're out, and we hold people accountable now. There's no more of this, there's no mercy, there's no sympathy, there's no understanding, there's no, we understand you're human, you screwed up. We're gonna look for some signs of contrition and go like, no, Jeffrey Toobin's just back. 8 months is enough. And what's astoundingly galling is that somehow along the way he said in this interview with CNN that he felt like the New Yorker had been excessively harsh for firing him for doing this. So I really would like to know, what is the standard here? I would like one uniform standard that gets applied instead of saying, well, this guy's really good buddies with Jeff Zucker, thus he's free to come back. I was really intrigued because I really, you could have to look really far and wide to find anybody who was upset that Jeffrey Toobin was not on CNN anymore. Like I said, he's been there since 2002. He's had a nice long run. Him being there meant that CNN wasn't hiring somebody else to be their chief legal analyst. And Greg, you figure there's got to be somebody else out there who can do it at least close to as well as Jeffrey Toobin. Oh, by the way, Jeffrey Toobin was not that good at that. In fact, if you're watching him, he very often was very unfair. I believe, it was after Kennedy announced his retirement, he guaranteed, or at least he boldly predicted, that abortion would be illegal in 20-some states within like a year and a half. Didn't happen. Jeffrey Toobin, when you read his coverage of the Supreme Court, he hates the guts of Clarence Thomas and most of the conservative justices. He makes Nina Totenberg look straight down the middle. That's, who this guy is. So for that reason alone, he was not a terribly good guy to be covering these things. But, okay, fine. But the idea that CNN's decided he's got to go back. Now, I want to point out, CNN's Brian Stelter wrote that some anchors and hosts at CNN expressed a desire to have Toobin back on their shows, since he's been a leading legal voice on television for decades. Do you know what's kind of weird about that, Greg? Brian Stelter is an anchor and host at CNN. So is one of those anchors and hosts, that Brian Stelter is referring to, is it Brian Stelter?
Could be.
Does Brian Stelter want to have Toobin back? I mean, I guess I'm saying this because my tweet reaction was that name them. I want to know who at CNN was like, we got to bring back Jeffrey Toobin. I want to know who thought everybody else that CNN has had as a legal analyst in the past 8 months isn't good enough, and that this job can only be done by Jeffrey Toobin. Because my first thought is I don't believe any of them exist. We'll see if it happens. I suppose if Jeffrey Toobin starts popping up on different shows, but is the other thing I crossed my mind after I tweeted that. Is one of those hosts Brian Stelter? Does Brian Stelter feel like 8 months suspension is sufficient? If so, I think Brian Stelter should come out and say so. Make the case for him getting that second chance. We don't have to do that. We're not going to get that because, Jeff Zucker's decided, fine. Yes, I'm going to keep him here. The other, just a last observation, because, there was a time in my career when I used to do CNN more, I used to, MSNBC, Fox News. Generally, if you saw me on television, there was a good sign that somebody else was on vacation. But there was just kind of this thing like, I like doing it. You like being recognized from doing TV and stuff. But I never understood how the booking process worked. I never understood how any of these things, like what made them decide somebody was good and somebody was bad. And then it was like in the late 2000s, I read this anecdote, and it just seems mind-boggling. This is not Jeff Zucker. This is his predecessor, Jonathan Klein. And it was the late 2000s. They were revamping their lineup, particularly in prime time. And at 8 o'clock, you may recall, for a little while there, Greg, they had a show that was hosted by Eliot Spitzer.
Yes.
This was the New York governor who resigned after being caught with a lot of prostitutes, because before then he had been a prosecutor who prosecuted people for prostitution and for soliciting prostitutes, right? So Spitzer resigns. He's in disgrace. He just kind of disappears. And then all of a sudden, CNN's like, not only do we want to bring him back as an analyst or as a talking head, we want to give him the AP. Like, that's the plum assignment. That's about as good as it gets in cable news. And apparently, it was New York Magazine did this long profile of the internal politics of CNN. And apparently, somebody when Jonathan Klein said, "This is what we're going to do," and he got quite a bit of resistance. And one of the executives said to him, some viewers may be turned off by his hooker scandal. Klein had reportedly snapped back, "I don't give an F word." Now, Greg, the job of a network president, presumably, is to try to maximize their audience. He's being told directly, it's not just Republicans who aren't going to like Eliot Spitzer. Women might have a problem with this Eliot Spitzer guy. And oh, by the way, they paired her up with Kathleen Parker. Rarely have you seen two hosts who just had utter contempt for each other. And it was just this weird, I'd say it was the most awkward thing on CNN, but they put Jeffrey Toobin back on yesterday. So that clearly vaults past it. But the idea that CNN anchors, the CNN presidents get warned, hey, you put this guy on the air, there's going to be a really strong negative reaction. And it might be a well-justified negative reaction. And the response is, I don't care. There's no sense to it. There's no connection to quality or talent or anything like that. It's just whoever the president of the network likes, even if there's a flashing neon sign that this particular host is going to be trouble. And if you doubt me, think of all the second and third and fourth and fifth and 23rd chances that Keith Olbermann has gotten from many networks. So that's where we are. So it's one of those things, why is television cable news terrible? Because it's run by terrible people who make terrible decisions and are warned that they're making terrible decisions and insist that, no, this is fine. Because this isn't just the old boys network. This isn't just cronyism, what we're seeing. What we're seeing here in bringing Toobin back on air, right after Chris Cuomo was caught being part of the PR team for Andrew Cuomo, is spiking the football. This is taking our heads and shoving our faces down into their depravity and making us experience it and saying, you can't touch us. We are untouchable. We will do whatever we want in programming. There is nothing you can do to stop us. And it kind of, very much shapes the way I see CNN, Greg. And I suspect I'm not the only one.
Jim, the good news is you don't have to think about this for the next week. Hopefully have a great time with your family. Enjoy the rest.
I will enjoy it, Greg. And unfortunately, I have to come back. No. I just don't look forward to coming back to a world where, Jeffrey Toobin is still going to be on television. See you in a week, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please do subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Tell your friends about us. Please continue to give us those 5-star ratings and those kind reviews. Those are very helpful to us, and we're very grateful for them. Get us on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us on Twitter. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend, and please tune in again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.
The border crisis is not only endangering our national security, but it is greatly empowering adversaries like Communist China and Russia. I'm Sarah Carter. On the latest Sarah Carter Show, I'll also tell you about my interview with the president of Guatemala. And Wisconsin Congressman Tom Tiffany joins me to discuss what he learned about the crisis from his recent visit to the dangerous Darien Gap in Panama. You don't want to miss it. Subscribe to the Sarah Carter Show at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.